Yes, good evening. Hope everyone is doing great. My name is Hamal Strayhorn. I am the director for Coalition Building and Diversity Education here at Mason, George Mason University. This is a new office, new initiative in the ODIME office, the office um, here on campus that focuses on multicultural inclusion and diversity education. Um, in Particularly in ODIME, there are several offices that sit within several spaces that sit within our office. One focusing on student access and equity, which focuses on our student DACA students and undocumented students, and also focuses on programmatic needs for first generation students. We also have an area of student engagement and racial justice, which focuses on our heritage months and heritage programs and the LGBTQ resources in my area, which is Coalition Building and Diversity Education, which is responsible for training, diversity education, and strategic initiatives that will focus on our students and on our campus. So tonight, I just want to welcome you and thank you all for coming. As we discussed during International Peace Week, police reform, and what does that look like here in the US and also internationally. And so I also want to allow some time for the Dialogue and Difference team to introduce themselves. And if you all could take some time to do that.
All right, I can go first. My name is Mac Turpen. I'm something of a veteran on the dialogue team. I've been around for about 3 semesters, so I'm very excited to get to facilitate this dialogue and just talk with all of you about police and police reform and what's going on in the status quo. So hope it's a good conversation. Oh, pronouns are he, him, his, by the way.
Hi, everybody. My name's Chris. I'm new to the Dialogue and Difference project team this semester, but I'm really looking forward to helping to facilitate the conversation tonight. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And yeah, I'll hand it over to the next.
Hi, I'm Amelia. I'm a former Dialogue and Difference intern, and I enjoy facilitating these events, and they're an opportunity for me to learn new things as well. So I'm excited to learn tonight and then be part of and help facilitate conversation later and learn from the presenters and the people I'm talking with. So yeah, and pronouns are she, her, hers.
I think that was everyone. And I hope you all can hear me well. I did get a message that said someone couldn't hear me well. And so I hope you can hear me a little bit better now. Before we get started into the conversation, I just want to go through some simple reassurance and some ground rules as we're having this dialogue tonight. And for one of our presenters this morning, Dr. Romano is coming from us. He's sitting in Korea right now, and he is with us tonight here this morning where he is. But coming into the space, we just want to say that this is a safe space for discussion. We want people to feel comfortable and feel brave enough to have these conversations. There may be things that are said in this space tonight that may be hard to hear depending on where you sit on this topic as we're having this dialogue. But just remember that this is a learning environment and that this is an opportunity for us to learn together and that this is a safe space that we can have this dialogue. You do have the ability to leave breakout rooms, because tonight we will, after the panel discussion, we will break out into breakout rooms, and you do have the ability to leave breakout rooms if discussions trigger you, or have or you experience trauma from any of the conversations that may take place. I also want to provide guidelines for our discussion tonight. We hope that as you're having dialogue within the breakout spaces and also engaging with the panel, we hope that you will listen to understand the other person's point of view. That is something, as we're in this learning environment, that we would hope that you would engage in, to take time to be heard, and to also be able to listen to what others have to say, particularly from their perspective. Try to listen more than you speak. So share the air with people, making sure that, I know some of us could be passionate about this topic, but we ask that you share the air and listen. We hope that each participant understand that they have the right to define themselves, speak from or with I statements, and from your own perspective. Avoid interrupting others, and maintain confidentiality. Never discuss who said what they said outside of the group. So what is said here stays here. What is learned here, you can share what you've learned, but try to keep things on a confidential level and not discuss who said what within this space. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Patricia to go over the overview of the events.
Thank you, Hamal. I'll introduce the panelists. I'll introduce my colleague, Arthur Romano, who is, as was mentioned, currently teaching on the George Mason campus in Seoul, Korea. He's an assistant professor at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. He has worked with police reform in multiple ways, in multiple places, and he'll be talking to you about that. And he has considerable experience in restorative practices and reparative work, and also reentry work with different groups. And he has different police organizations that he works with. So he'll talk to you about that. And we're very grateful that he can come on at 8 o'clock in the morning and describe and talk to us in ways that we can expand our understanding of police reform and what that might look like and what's involved in the work itself. And I'm Patricia Maulden. I'm associate professor and dialogue and difference director, and also student engagement coordinator. So here I am. So the order of the presentation is, I'm going to go first only because I have backstory. I'll take you on a very short ride to the 1700s, very short. We don't have to stay there very long. And so once I have presented and Arthur has presented, then there will be questions from all of you. And you can either raise those questions in the chat for everybody. You can even, so that you don't forget, you can even do it while we're talking. We won't respond to them right then, but they will get responded to. Or when both of us are done speaking, there'll be a period of time for questions that can be used by the raise hand. And McCoy Turpen is going to handle that part of it. So you will know that the whole session won't be collapsed by my pushing the wrong button. So that is up to that. So then you all will go into breakout groups for about a half an hour. And there will be a facilitator there just to help guide the conversation if it gets stuck. And then you'll be returned in a half an hour to this space where we are all together again. And then we'll do each breakout group will do a debrief of what they talked about, exploring the three or four main things or dilemmas that they talked about and how that was. And, you know, we thought about this, but so, and then we can see the different groups and how different groups perhaps went in different ways with that. And then after that, everybody can ask any follow-up questions based on what the other groups said, and then we wrap it up. So that is how that's going to go. And if I can figure it out, we're going to have a poll at the end as they wrap up exercise, and then we go home and we think about this and ponder what we've heard and some of the things that we may need to consider. So I imagine that means I need to now change my role to share my screen. Share screen. And play from the start. All right. So I like visuals, and so I have visuals. So the whole framing of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to put my timer on hopefully, is the patterns of policing and potentials for peace. And the patterns of policing in this case go back to, as I said, the 1700s. The picture, the black and white picture, I'm not sure, it's on my left, it might be on your right, I don't know. The March 1991, that's a still of the video from the Rodney King beating. I'm from Los Angeles. And the effects of that beating and the lack of, and the acquittal of all of the officers involved there with the batons, and the 17 that were observing, stemmed a riot that cost the city of Los Angeles $1 billion in damages. Just FYI. Okay. So an overview, I'm not gonna, so I have this thesis about what peace demands, and that's for me. So you might want to think about, what does peace mean? What is it? What are the component parts? What might it look like? And I'm making the assertion that police reform is part of that peace building process, or the building peace in the United States, and breaking the patterns that have existed since the days of the founding. And we have 25% of the world's prisoners, and we have 5% of the world's population, just so you know. We take incarceration very seriously here. And I just want to show you, this building here is the jail in Sacramento, California. And it's pretty large. The one in Fairfax is pretty large too, but I think this one has a beat. And the idea of enough, when is it enough? When is it enough with what we're doing? And when is it time to de-escalate, to change processes? Now, here we are in the 1700s. The idea of slave patrols is one of the origins of modern policing. Slave patrols, as you can see by the, if you can see this, it's a plantation police runaway slave patrol badge. And these are the patrol, oh, I knew, sorry. The center one with the regulations, that is what the slave patrols did. And then there's the watchmen and police officers of Boston are looking for kidnappers and slave catchers. So that's our history. That's where we come from. So I'm not going to go into all of these things, but the idea of policing in the slaveholding states, it morphed from the slave patrol squadrons using vigilante tactics to enforce laws related to slavery, particularly on the plantations. And they had pretty much carte blanche in any way that they wanted to engage, and could go into anyone's home if they were suspicious that they were harboring an escaped enslaved person. And that shifted a bit in the North to municipal policy departments that founded most East Coast and Central, all the police forces from slave patrol squadrons to the formation of formalized policing were overwhelmingly white and male, and often responded more to disorder than to crime. And that we'll see. And I would like you to think about the patterns that we will see as I run through some of these slides and data points. Okay, so Black Codes. Black Codes is post 13th Amendment, meaning the revoking of the right to own slaves. And in the center, the civil rights of freedmen in Mississippi, it has certain rights that the freedmen now have. And then there's in italics, a provided. And there's always a caveat. There's always room to maneuver for those who wanted to maneuver and it's code language for we can get around this by. This is Patricia Maulden's framing of it. So Jim Crow began in 1865, immediately following the roots of the Black Codes fed into Jim Crow, but the Black Code started right after the 1865 at the end of the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States. And here's a caveat: except as punishment for a person convicted of a crime. So Black Codes allowed white law people to enter into any, they could seize your children, they could remove your voting rights to control where you lived, bring you into indentured servitude, et cetera, et cetera. And if you complained as a Black person, former Confederate soldiers worked as police and judges, and so your recourse was blocked there. And there were also labor camps for the incarcerated, and it was a revise of enslavement. And the sentencing was racially based, as we can often see today. All right, so no more. It's in the kind of police gear that they wear has shifted over time as well. Arthur may or may not speak of that. But what is the effect of the arrest? I see the arrest, the conviction, the incarceration, and disenfranchisement as a chain. It's a chain that we have to break apart, link by link by link, because the effects of it are dire. And there I went again. Okay, so I'm not going to read all these things to you, but I think it's important that 1 in 3 American adults, men primarily, are arrested by age 23, which is pretty startling. For Black men, the rate is 1 in 2. Drug arrests are down, but 1.5 million are still arrested yearly, mostly for marijuana possession, which is the spur for legalization of marijuana. And Black individuals arrest numbers have gone up 23% from 1980 to at least 14, which was where that study ended. And 28% of all arrests are Black individuals, who make up 13% of the population. All right, this is where it's modernized. So the zero tolerance approach started in the 80s and 90s with Reagan, and then Clinton picked it up. And it refers to allocating heavy law enforcement resources to where some form of crime is said to be endemic, and I would said to be endemic, and then apply immediate and harsh methods with really no consideration for circumstances. And then the quality of life, which seems a misnomer here, was begun in New York City in the early 90s during the Giuliani administration. And that was about heavy policing a number of normally non-criminal actions, such as congregating, drinking in public, minor offenses, graffiti, public urination, panhandling, etc. And the unlicensed street vending in public places, which is where Eric Garner unfortunately fell and was killed on the street for selling loose cigarettes without a license. So when coupled with zero tolerance and the quality of life, and the ideas and the framing of police performance reviews and what is seen as a mark in your favor, it would include arrests and more punitive kind of actions, not, I gave the guy a citation and, it helped his family. It's like, what can you do? What do you show me what you've been as a law enforcement officer? And so it's sort of an order maintaining business, even when there may not be disorder. So again, pictures. So the mass incarceration, we have 2.3 million individuals incarcerated at the moment. That does not necessarily include all the people in jail or in other forms of detention. And with that incarceration, particularly in felony cases, and even sometimes beyond felony cases, if a person can end up starting with a misdemeanor and end up with a felony in certain circumstances, without really having done much in between. If you misbehave inside, there's penalties for that, et cetera, et cetera. So why does mass disenfranchisement matter? You can have some ideas about that. We can think of the Bush v. Gore. I now read law review journals. I'm not recommending it, but it needs to be done. And there's considerable data on the cost of mass disenfranchisement, on shifting political ideas and shifting policy. If I'm disenfranchised and I think that a policy needs to be changed, I have no social recourse to do it. I have become civilly dead in the sense that I am a non-entity in the political sphere. So imagine how you might feel if that was the case, and imagine how hopeless things would be. It affects families, communities, businesses. I could go on a long tirade about it. And that's why the poll tax receipt is there. Once you are released from the facility as a former felon, you have fees, payments, all kinds of stuff in tens of thousands of dollars sometimes. And the poll tax is a revision. This is a revision of the poll tax, which really meant at that point, if you were Black, you needed to have no debts at all. And so now if you're a former incarcerated person, you need to clear your debt, the debt you are held responsible to the state or the municipality, whatever it is. So you have to clear that before you can vote, in that case. So 1 of every 13 African American or Black individuals has lost their voting rights due to felony disenfranchisement. 1 in every 56 non-Black voters has lost their right to vote. So it's demographically significant. So this is aspirational. I don't generally get aspirational, but I did. So imagine if we answered the demand of peace. What would be the demands? What would those demands be? Which we'd have to think that through. How do we attend to individual, social, and community needs regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, or economic status? Imagine if we did not default to the containment of individuals and groups, which we do. We love containing populations by zoning laws and making sure they're separated, redlining, you name it. We love doing that as a nation, apparently, because then we feel safe, whoever we are, and they are over there and they're fine there. So we tell ourselves. So if we saw the value in each person and develop policies accordingly. So imagine speaking and acting that world that we haven't seen, but we would like to see into being. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here, and in other ways of getting at these really horrible situations that people who have done their time, paid their debt, if indeed they were guilty, which is not a given. And yet this conviction follows them to their grave, and it limits everything they will do, almost everything they will do until they die. And their children suffer, their parents and grandparents suffer, and our society suffers. So that's something to think about. And yeah, I always have to have a graffiti. I like to have some graffiti in the thing. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it, and I look forward to your questions.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Korea, where it's from the future in the morning here. And nice to be able to scroll through the faces and names and see some people that I recognize and miss, and then lots of new names and faces as well. This is an important topic, and one obviously really relevant to the International Day of Peace and in the US, in terms of thinking about the relationship between justice and peace. Patricia did a great job of talking about just the far-reaching consequences of mass incarceration, and that mass incarceration and the disproportionate effects on Black people in America has a really long history in the US, right? And we know that today, unarmed Black people are shot at 4 times the rates of whites, that Black folks are incarcerated at 5 times higher rate, and that policing has been extended in our society. I think being abroad is often a reminder of how far, and especially in this case, being in Korea, how far that securitization of our society extends, right, into our schools. And I'm trying to even explain those dynamics of how far reaching that is sometimes hard for people who haven't visited the United States, right? And so we see the emergence of this dynamic that's more recent, the school to prison pipeline, right? Where children are funneled because of disciplinary infractions in schools into the criminal justice system, right? And so if we're going to talk about police reform, we also need to have a conversation about broader social reform, and the realities of and tensions of trying to have a responsible and compassionate policing in a society with profound racial and economic segregation and disparity. So that's one of the big questions that I'll put up on the board, right? Sometimes in the workshops, they call it a parking lot, but interested to hear if that comes up in your small group. So today I was going to talk more specifically about training and education. So my work is largely about doing social justice and conflict resolution education and understanding how people impacted by violence learn and how they can also teach others. And so working with police is one component of that. And often many of the communities that I'm working with in the United States are communities that are impacted by police violence, as well as structural violence, in terms of health and housing and many other areas. So I'll start a bit broader than I had planned to just say there's some major kind of pillars to this conversation today about police accountability that you'll hear in the discussions nationally. One is, understanding about and responding to officer misconduct. And so one component of that is about how are officers evaluated and what is a just process for officer accountability that we need to think about when we think about this topic. That means how are officers reviewed internally inside of the departments. If there is for example, they may be reviewed by a conduct committee of their peers. Is there any feedback from any other groups from the community or elsewhere that can play a role in evaluating that misconduct, or external reviews of that? And if there is misconduct, then who knows about it? And so how broadly is it shared? And there are a series of issues around where police misconduct is downgraded in certain cases because people are not fired and unions work out situations where that misconduct may not register, right? Or where agencies are not sharing those records, or where the public does not have access to them. So this conversation of police reform is a lot about accountability. And so how we handle and understand misconduct and what's done about it and who knows about it is one major pillar. Another is around, what happens if there has been misconduct, police violence or brutality. And so one component of that is, the criminal process. And we see how difficult it is to, for an officer to run through the full legal process in situations of police shootings and be found guilty. And a lot of conversation around who's in the best position to prosecute those cases and what needs to take place in terms of there being fair representation opportunities around those issues in the legal system. Another area that's emerged that's really important is around the civil fines that come. So you will hear about these large settlements that happen when there's been a police shooting, or it doesn't always have to be in the case of a fatality, but when there's police brutality or misconduct. And so municipalities often foot the bill for those cases where there's been a civil settlement, and there is an emerging, growing interest in having those costs shift to law enforcement agencies or officers more directly, where they may have to, for example, carry insurance similar to how doctors do, or where unions or law enforcement agencies have to carry them for the entire group. So another question there around another pillar, I'm going to call it, around accountability and police reform. A kind of subcomponent here that's also important is about military weapons. So the transfer of military weapons directly from the battlefield, from military equipment that's has been brought from Afghanistan and Iraq and transferred to police departments has garnered a lot of concern, rightful concern, as well as the increasing use of those military weapons in civilian policing, but especially like in large protest moments, and the tension between having more militarized policing and the irony, right, oftentimes of militarized policing responses to protests about police brutality and militarization, right, that we've seen now play out pretty consistently for 5 or 6 years, right? So, but an important component there is that a large amount of the military weapons that have been purchased and acquired by police departments have also come from micro grants and other kinds of grants through anti-terrorism initiatives. So while direct transfer of military weapons is one way that that officers and law enforcement agencies get military grade weapons, it also happens through a series of kind of granting bodies. And so that is another component of accountability, because obviously the militarization of police reinforces a sense of the police as potentially like an occupying army. It can be disruptive of trust, right? I mean, when you have a tank on the street or something that looks like a tank on the street, that will shake your trust if they're, and as well as a kind of different way of thinking about policing that often comes with the engagement of those kind of military practices. So we see that there's a real movement and increasing interest. And I think for conflict resolution, the social science is pretty clear that that abuses of power occur in situations in which there's a lack of accountability, right? And we see that from studies of different kinds of experimental studies and then direct observation, ethnographic work too. And so really from a conflict point of view, this is about, right, thinking about how to respond to those power dynamics. And so a kind of hidden, not often overlooked stakeholder, but not so much hidden anymore, that's involved in this dynamic is the relationship between civilian task force and other groups that are trying to do more civilian oversight of police, and police unions, which are fighting for their, for protection of officers, and negotiating their contracts and a variety of other things, which often results in contracts that make it difficult to do some of this work that we're talking about in terms of reform around evaluation of misconduct and penalties and et cetera, that come from that. So there is a kind of really quick overview that, and there's a lot more to that, obviously, and many of you will have information and knowledge about that I don't have. But just to sort of some context setting that I wanted to highlight to begin with. I want to talk about conflict resolution specifically, and to talk about training, police training. So I often will say that police training is kind of one of the hidden parts of police reform, and also a hidden component when we have conversations about police militarization. And it's a somewhat of a black box issue, which is to say that what is being taught and how it's being taught and who has the opportunities to review and evaluate and give feedback on that can be quite limited. In an interview with a high-level law enforcement officer who I was asking to describe the context of police training and was talking to me about state-level training initiatives and how an overview and who like is involved in doing that work. They said, oh yeah, that the police training overview work, that's where police officers get put out to pasture. So like a job right before retirement where, you may be for some people may be considered cushy, but for others as one that's kind of on the periphery of the work, right? So there's some really critical areas, I think, where conflict resolution can make a contribution to thinking about police training, namely in terms of conflict de-escalation training. And there's surprisingly little conflict de-escalation training. And much of that which falls under conflict de-escalation will be related to shoot and don't shoot scenarios. So we know that conflict escalates across a spectrum, and the majority of what officers deal with in terms of a conflict escalating will not be at the level of shoot or don't shoot type scenarios, right? So the police continuum of force, when I'm working with police officers at the lowest level, we have the physical presence, and the next level is often verbal commands. And one of the prompts that often can create some laughter in workshops that I ask is I say, let's just say you used this at home and you came home for your partner, you were really hungry and you were hopeful that they would make some food for you. And so you come in and you notice that hasn't happened. And so you do the first level of force. You have physical presence, you stand in the kitchen. And then he or she doesn't respond. And so you proceed to verbal commands. You say, please move towards the refrigerator and begin to get supplies and put them on the counter. I say, what happens next? And usually the group will like erupt into laughter, like, oh, I get the frying pan upside my head kind of response, right? Because there is for us a world in conflict resolution between physical presence and verbal commands, right? And in fact, officers have all kinds of skills already around dealing with conflict. So when I ask a different question and say, well, how many of you have been in a tense situation in which that conflict has just de-escalated either because of actions that you've taken or that community members have taken? For officers that are out there every day, they raise their hands quite quickly and have examples. So there's this other component that is a lot of knowledge around conflict de-escalation is locked up in these organizations without an opportunity to share how people are de-escalating, what's informing their practice. So some kind of subcomponents of conflict de-escalation. You'll see training that does what people call like verbal jiu-jitsu, or what we would say is kind of communication skills-based work. There's growing work, which I think is very promising, around doing work with officers around historical knowledge in DC, bringing officers to the African American Museum. As an example, in Connecticut Center for Nonviolence that I work with, doing work around the civil rights movement and exploring the dynamics of racial inequality in America and how civilians have responded through protest and other mechanisms to challenge that, and considering the role of policing in a society where there is racial injustice and what is the proper role of police officers in such a system, and raising those kinds of ethical concerns. And then of course, like bringing in theories and models and that help inform and think about why is conflict happening and how are people likely to respond to those conflicts. We know from our research that experiential education is really important. So if I give you a written case study about a conflict scenario and ask you what you should do after we've done a training, you're likely to write an eloquent essay perhaps, but if we stand up and we engage in a role play of the same simulation, you may respond differently than what you just wrote down on the paper, right? So conflict moves fast, it's experiential, it's embodied, it's emotional. I think an important frontier of this is not only radically increasing the support that officers get for de-escalation training in the training component, but then also making sure that that is very integrated with experiential role plays and debriefing and having the opportunity to make meaning after you're in a situation like that moves so quickly. Which leads me to, I think, what is a kind of last frontier just in terms of this training component, which is reflective practice. We see the widespread integration of reflective practice in the medical field. It would be expected if you're a surgeon, that if you're gracing the halls of the most prestigious, medical school, no one would expect you to just, go out even after your residency and start doing surgery without an element of reflective practice. And yet we find it extremely rare that officers are supported in doing reflective practice where they get to actually evaluate specific conflict situations, their choices in those situations, and what the possible learning is from that. So I would say that this should be a concern for us, because even even if conflict de-escalation training is expanded, we need to get this component right to develop leadership and culture in police institutions for that ongoing reflective practice and learning. Reflective practice can occur across multiple levels. One is what we call single loop learning, right? Which is like, how did you do it? What happened? What would you do different next time? So very pragmatic in that way, but also this double loop learning, which is where you examine the assumptions underlying those choices and your read of the situation itself. So why did you read threat into that situation? What were you evaluating in the context? How were you understanding your relationship to the other officer? And this is where you can also have elements of implicit bias, right, that come into it, your own reflection on your own experiences of conflict in your personal life, right? A variety of things that come into the deconstructing and thinking about those assumptions. And coming up with new ideas about how to challenge those assumptions and try out those new ideas in practice, right? The last thing I'm going to say is, this is kind of my shtick, and everybody who's been in a reflective practice class has probably heard me say this, but it's not just the questions we ask, but who we ask them with for reflective practice. So knowledge is constructed in a systematic context, right? And so in the work that I've been engaging with in Connecticut, one of the things I think is really interesting is that community members are engaged in leading the de-escalation training. So teams of community members, many of them African-American, who are trainers, co-trainers with police, and then are involved in these kind of critical conversations together and in ongoing like monthly refreshers, right? So who you are debriefing with and who you're constructing that knowledge with is really important. So on the negative side, a critical component of militarization of policing is that distancing from community, right? Community as enemy, community as total threat, right? Safety, right? Understood as separation from, right? And so we need to be producing knowledge in communities, right? That connect, that knowledge production itself can be a vital connection with the community. Now to the defunding the police conversation, so controversial, and why not end with some controversy? I think part of what is being discussed or expressed aspirationally, to use Patricia's term, is in defunding the police is a recognition that we need to support conflict response mechanisms and meeting people's human needs much more robustly at the community level. In fact, even if police are largely defunded, that money, as huge as those sums are, you know, 6 billion plus in New York City for the New York City Police Department, will still be a drop in the bucket of what is needed to respond to the profound inequality, racial and economic inequality that we have in America. And so that's the social reform component. Now, police will be some of the first people to tell you that they got called into situations all the time that they're not in a position to help with, right? That a social worker would be more useful, that a community advocate would be more useful in. So it's about getting those supports and increasing those supports in the community, right? And yet what I'm saying about the training means that in some ways then for those officers that are working, that there's also additional support that's needed for those officers, right? And then as we expand our rapid response to conflict, restorative justice in communities, the prevention work, this component about reflective practice plays a key role in keeping a connection between police and community, because the police then see themselves, and many police do, right? But these moves towards militarization are highly disruptive of this. Police then see themselves in a spectrum of conflict prevention and violence responses to violence, right? So it's like, you're not alone. Other people are doing this, right? We have people who are responding to conflict every day in our schools and our communities at our neighborhood level. We all need to be able to see each other, see where our work, you know, makes sense, where it touches and where the limits of our work are, and to continue to learn from each other. I really think that kind of, so there's kind of two sides to the coin, right? Like maybe some people would say carrot and stick, but I don't think it conforms like just so simply to that. But on the one side is all these accountability measures. Training changes are not going to be very effective if nobody has a concern that or if people are not realistically going to be held accountable for misconduct. But on the other side of it, we see that learning is going to be a bridge to ongoing improvement of practice, and for breaking down potentially even that as a way of breaking down that separation with community. And that's where I'll leave it. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. So now we will have the questions and answer, and I'm going to turn it over to Mac Turpen for that.
Yeah, so questions should go pretty easy. If you would like to voice your question, just raise your hand and we'll go in order. And for those of you who just want to write your question down, between people voicing their own questions, I'll just read the questions to the panelists as the questioning goes forward. So. Yes, David Osterman. Seems like you're muted.
Do I need to unmute him? Oh, yeah.
Some police operations are inherently violent. If you take the question like the Breonna Taylor incident, police drug raids. Now, I could be a nice guy as a policeman, but this situation where you're bursting into somebody's house can lead to all sorts of violence and misidentifications. And so the issue there is, I think, changing what is the purpose of drug raids? In other words, do police really think that that's an effective way to reduce drug use? Or should we have, instead of police raids, should we establish drug rehabilitation centers in the same area as a better way and reduce police raids? And the question is, I mean, why are the police continuing to do that? Is it an effective way to control drug use in the community, really?
Arthur, you're better. You probably have more experience working with the police than I do, and I can fill in the gaps.
And I thought the question just kind of stands on its own, right? It's like it's one for us to all consider. But I think that's what's promising about the moment that we're in, right? Is there's a questioning around what are the limits of policing, and where is it necessary? To what degree is it necessary, and in what contexts are there better approaches? And so I don't think there's anything to suggest, for example, that drug rates reduce drug usage.
No.
Right. So I think we would find a lot of agreement. So I think your question just is really helpful and stands for.
So why do they do them?
Well, that kind of goes back to the use of force and the now my brain is no longer functioning, but the zero tolerance kind of thing, and also it goes back to techniques from the 80s and 90s about you hit them hard and you just beat the you-know-what out of them. And it's a part of the war on drugs. It's a war because you're kicking down their doors. So it's all tied up in the way that it's, in some ways, that it's been policies have been created for it. And the understanding that, for instance, in the super predator theory of the same time frame, that Black and brown, particularly young men, were intrinsically flawed evil doers. They were super predators and had to be contained. And that was a big driver for mass incarceration. So then if we kind of shift that lens over there to and drug dealers are part of, they're part of that Black brown, even if they're not, they're part of that intrinsically evil or flawed evildoers. So you hit them hard. And if you don't, you're seen as soft on crime. And if you don't, then your boxes don't get ticked for promotion or for pay raises. Now, Arthur, do you think that's legitimate? I mean, in terms of reading it correctly.
I think we're in a moment of reckoning around this kind of the punitive approach. That's what I hear in what you're saying. And so absolutely, there's been a political reality where it's been difficult to critique those things that has been dominant for a few decades now. But there's evolution of people's thinking, I think, in the recognition that is not an effective way of kind of disrupting those processes, right? But if you have communities are also not policed similarly, right? And we know that along lines of race and class, that neighborhoods are policed differently. And so who is surveilled and arrested for drugs differs radically, right? For example,
absolutely.
I haven't seen a whole lot of drug raids. Maybe there are on George Mason's campus, but that is another component there. But the question now, where the rubber meets the road, partly that's been brought up is, well, where is the money going to come from to do the additional support work necessary? And right now there's a conversation of it should come directly out of the police's budget, and that may be a component of it. But also, as I mentioned, I think the scale of what is necessary to respond to these other issues of human security is even beyond that. And we need to, I think, also take that conversation on as well in this if we can.
Thank you all. The next question that came up was from Professor Hirsch. She says, do either of you have any experiences of police being trained in mediation techniques and acting in a mediating capacity? For instance, in a situation where force might have been used. can police be effective mediators?
Well, I don't have any direct experience, but I don't see a reason why, if they were trained and were willing to do it, that they could not be effective mediators. Now, whether the people involved, the citizens involved would like them to be the mediators, would trust them to be the mediators right away, would be another issue. But that could be something certainly to add to the mix of de-escalatory processes. I think in some communities, I think it would be about race and status and so on, that might be more likely than in others, which is you got to kick the dang door down and you arrest them or worse. So I think it would depend on where this was happening, how supported it would be, but then that might be something along the continuum of how do we envision peace regarding law enforcement, or whatever you want to call it, policing. Arthur, what do you think?
I would just say, yes, there is examples of police mediation programs. I've been one step removed from that, so I haven't ever seen it firsthand, but I know there's been a bunch of work done on the West Coast and some in New York City. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting maybe what the line is between like full-fledged mediation and what is kind of like a spot intervention on a street mm-hmm. level. That to me, I would be interested in what you find, Susan, and anything that you learn along that, but I'm sure others will have resources as well. But yeah, mediation, people have been definitely exploring that role with officers. And then, yeah, Patricia, you brought up good issues about people's perceptions of safety and whether they want to mm-hmm. have mediations led by law enforcement. But those skills, I like the idea of those skills, mm-hmm. officers having those skills and being able to use them in these encounters with community members, right? Even just the act of listening and being able to reflect back what folks are hearing can be in certain situations helpful.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I have an example of this from Massachusetts. I just did a study on de-escalation training. In Massachusetts, some police departments do take the basic mediation training as part of 4 hours a year annual requirement that they take some form of de-escalation training. They actually meet this. So they've taken that, and there was one town, a wealthier town where they have budget to provide training and so on, where a seasoned officer of over 20 years took this training. He also took another training, and he wasn't sure about all this stuff. He just, he was not buying into it. And there was a call in Massachusetts, wintertime, cold, snowy day, with a guy who was outside, no shirt on. They said he was going crazy. And this officer asked if he could be the key officer. And the supporting officer standing by said, oh, this is going to be a knockdown, drag out fight. This is not going to be pretty, yada, yada, yada. Well, that officer, after his training, de-escalated the situation and talked the guy down. Now, they won't call it mediation. They're not going to use that word. And you're lucky if you're going to hear them say it was de-escalation. But he turned around to his boss and the trainer and said, hey, this is from that training. And they got the guy to a hospital rather than arresting, rather than the knockdown, drag out fight. But this is after 2 trainings, a mediation training and another training that we could talk about another time. So yes, they're starting. But that was back in 2017. So who knows what they're doing today.
Thank you. Kayla, I saw you had your hand up. Did you ask your question in the chat? I saw you also did that as well. Okay. Okay. I'll go to the next person then. Jared Pellich.
Yeah. So my question actually comes kind of off the back of something that Mary Kate wrote in the chat, where she was talking about the 911 calls getting routed to non-police de-escalation. And I've seen that there's one town, I think it was in Georgia, where they did that, and they've had 43 cases and nothing has happened, or no case required there to be a police officer that shows up. The question comes into, there was a bad reaction in the police zone in Portland when crime went up and the police stepped back. What do you think will happen if during these cases and they're trying to use other people and something goes wrong and the police aren't? It's easy to people use the police and they blame them a lot for different things. But if you have a different professional there, and something does go wrong, what do you think would be the result of something like that? When people think that if the police had been here, it wouldn't have happened like this.
That is always that is an issue, because if something goes wrong, it's always what if instead of this it was that. So I don't know how to, and is there a guarantee that nothing bad is going to happen? No. So what's your take on this, Arthur?
The internet bleeped out for a second. So
Oh.
I think the question was like, if there's embedded social workers and others with police, could that help the situation? Is that right?
Yeah, but then also if something goes wrong, is that correct, Jared?
Yeah, the question is about like, for some of these cases when you have events that are transpiring and they try to send a social worker or someone else, like someone's going to be making that decision. And I mean, some of these cases, it is necessary to have police there. So like, at what level do you have a trade-off where trying to reduce the police's role will start to possibly pull them too far away from the things that they're supposed to be doing?
So I think that's one of those questions where I imagine you would need feedback mechanisms, right? In response to, I think your question raises a number of things that, I don't know the answers. One is just also about accountability in those situations. So when you have hybrid teams with social workers and let's say and police are there and an incident goes wrong, who's responsible in that situation and how you determine that seems important. But I think in terms of if you have social workers and other community groups engaging in interventions where they feel they're consistently needing police to be involved, that, it would be helpful to, and I would expect to hear from those groups, right, about what those problems are and if police, backup or intervention is what they need and if it's useful and those kinds of components. So, that's a possibility that we'll see more of those conversations, right? If we see a huge increase for, in these kind of more community intervention models. There's just a question, I think, that is very much alive for activist communities and other, communities that are deeply impacted around these issues, around to what degree is police reform possible, and is the best form of police reform simply to have as limited contact as possible, right? And that question can't really be answered without looking at what it takes to expand other forms of response, including meeting people's human needs, right? So that they're, not as involved, not as put under so many pressures, and also not without, economic livelihood and engagement and, right, potentially engagement in, black market economic undertakings, right? So all of that is in this mix for us to then think about, well, okay, now we've radically, transformed the set of mechanisms, response mechanisms in the community, and tried to find out what's that limit for community intervention, and where do these community groups, now where are we hearing from these community groups that in fact they either they need some kind of other support? It's not, so it's just not like a light switch, you know, where it's like, okay, we've switched to, you know, all to having police aren't involved in anything and they're never going to be involved again, and we're completely funding all this other stuff. It may narratively look like that, you know, in certain spaces, right? But in fact, we're a long way away from that.
Okay, I thank you for all your questions, and I know there are more questions, but we're going to go into the breakout groups, and you can talk about those in your smaller groups. Thank you, Arthur, for your comments and for being present, and thank you all for really interesting and definitely thought-provoking questions that we may or may not have answers for at this point. So I've already set up the breakout groups, and just so the facilitators know, Amelia, you're group 1, Mac, you're group 2, Chris, you're group 3, and Gary, you're group 4, okay? Because I'm never sure what's available behind the screen because I don't dare go there. Okay, so I will click a button and you'll all be magically transported. And then in about 15 minutes, we kind of have a shorter span for breakout groups. I'll bring you back to the room and then we'll do a brief wrap up. Okay? Facilitators, on your mark, get set, go. Carry back, yeah. So is there, do I have representatives from group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4? This is a check to see that everybody's out of the room. Yeah, okay. All right, so facilitators, did you ask somebody to do the debrief? Thank you. Group 1.
Hi. Actually, I volunteered. Does anyone from group 1 want to do the debrief? If not, I can go ahead and do it. No? Okay. So everyone, most of the people in the group talked, which was great. And we had a lot of different thoughts on the matter. We talked about similarities between issues associated with police violence in America and in Israel, and about how some of the victims of police violence are similar in both contexts, and talked about how in Camden, a city that is one of the most violent cities in the U.S., recently completely disbanded their police force, quadrupled funding and training time for the police department, and that's had a lot of, I think, positive effects on the community there, a lot less resentment of the police force by community members. And then we also talked about the value of reflective practice in police training and how that could be really valuable, and how only 4 hours a year for officers to do that is not sufficient at all, and according to some of us, we thought. And it could give officers an opportunity to reflect on what some of their motivations and fears were in a certain situation and how that influenced their behavior and their reactions. So those are some of the things we talked about.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Group 2.
Would anyone from my group like to debrief? All right, I can do it. So first, Rodell had a great point. He was the first one to speak. He just spoke about the current state of police violence, and kind of how the way that Black men and Black people generally within the state of police violence are often scripted as violent, and are unfairly policed within our current system. And he had a lot of nuanced, great things to say, but obviously this is debrief, so we got to go through more stuff. But that's kind of how we opened. So next, Richard had a great thing to say about the way in which standards are applied, and said that it's very important to understand that certain individuals are redeemable within systems. we then asked the question, what are the kind of like outlines that creates a person that is redeemable to be able to become, what is an acceptable police officer? What are good standards? I forget who said, Beth had a great point about the way in which, and kind of how Dr. Romano said that it's very hard to understand what those outlines are. There isn't really a universal conception of what is a police officer that operates within acceptable legal limits. And it's different from every single department, wherever you are within the states or outside of the United States. And so that's kind of where our conversation ended. But we talked pretty in depth about those issues.
Fantastic, thank you. Group 3? That's Chris.
Is anyone going to volunteer to debrief? No? I will, okay, I'll do it. Our group, it was really interesting because we had different perspectives right in the introduction and the idea question. And so there was a lot of talk about kind of addressing the overarching racism within the policing structure and structures within our nation, and having a couple of our participants actually coming from the criminal justice field and police, actual police officers in our group, brought up great things about like unionizing, how police unions work, different things within the policing structure that kind of reinforce things that needed to be changed. One of the most, I think, powerful things that was mentioned was one of the participants shared a conversation that, or I guess the fact that she had to have conversations with her boys about this is what you do and what you don't do when you're approached by a police officer, or how you, and to hear that experience and that first person narrative about what has to be taught to children of color. That was pretty powerful. And we also had other people come in and acknowledge that those aren't conversations that some of us have to have with our children. And so that was a really powerful moment in the dialogue. And as far as where we go from here, I think a lot of, the only thing we kind of got to discuss was how different areas would probably require different types of reform or different types of restructuring, because different areas, different cultures, different people experience policing in different ways and are affected by it in really, really different ways.
Thank you, that's great. And lastly, Gary, group 4.
I'll ask the same question. Anyone in group 4 want to share what did we talk about once?
I feel like I could. I think
Mary Kay's my hero. Go ahead.
Yeah, I could. We kind of started by being like, why are you here? And discovered that Kayla and I share like a restorative justice in schools perspective. But then we got into, we didn't get into what Gary wanted to ask about, which is more like the history of policing. We didn't have time to get into that, but we did get into how do we get communities involved in this instead of just relying on structures or institutions, but then also what are the needs that need to be addressed. So Amber brought up the question of getting communities involved, and then Jared was bringing up like, how we can't just throw money at people. We got to really look at this very specific needs that people have, and he was specifically bringing up formerly incarcerated people. And then we got into, how to improve the relationship between police and community, or reframe even their jobs as more service oriented. And then Kayla was bringing up, do we invest more in police or do we invest in other things? And kind of what is this at this crux of this abolition versus reform argument when we talk about police? And then Guillaume was bringing up, you know, just on a basic level, it's about justice and, you know, how are we applying our laws on that practical level and not overstepping? And then Gary was getting into talking about, you know, what does it mean when you say defund? And then we were like, I can't believe time's up.
Yeah, Professor Maulden, was that really 30 minutes? I'm like,
No, when I say it ends at 9 o'clock, I try to keep to that time.
got you. Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, we could have gone till 9:30.
Oh, we could have gone till 11 without.
Yeah.
But
But at least 9:30. So I had to wrap it up. I had to wrap up the breakout group sessions earlier than the plan was, because we had such good conversation prior to that. So it's better to have too much to say than too little. So we can perhaps think about follow-up. What do we do for follow-up in terms of another dialogue or whatever? So if anybody has any ideas of what they might like to see put forward by the Dialogue and Difference team, the Carver School, and ODIME, and we can bring in others, please let us know. It would be very helpful to know that there's an interest in certain things that we could schedule activities and events around. So that would be great. Arthur, do you have any closing comments?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with the larger Mason family. And I think that, I was saying on the break that we're in a moment, right, where there's the possibility for all kinds of change, and it's an all hands on deck type of situation. So I know I've been having this experience, and maybe for some of you, it's a question of where's our contribution in this, right? There's a really great opportunity to increase the community level work, to get involved in training, to raise awareness about where there needs to be more money and resources put into human security, not just focused on punishment. So there's so much opportunity, but I really do think we're going to need to sustain the energy of that change, to be able to see these kinds of numbers. Awareness has increased a lot about the systemic context of police shootings. What has not changed is the number of police shootings. From 2014, when Michael Brown was shot, to now, there's been no shift. And so that needs to be obviously one of our barometers as well. And that's, part of what the stakes are in this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Hamal, do you have some closing comments?
Sorry. Not really. But this was just an awesome conversation. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to talk about a much needed topic, a topic that is relevant and that is affecting the lives of people today. And hopefully from our conversation, we can start moving towards change.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Patricia.
Yes.
It's always good to say, Jesus Christ, you mean the time is up already versus...
I know it.
We have to have another 45 minutes of this. So it's a classic case of good news, bad news.
Yeah, it is. It's unfortunate, but because I think it could have gone, it had legs, as we say. It had legs, so thank you. For the Dialogue and Difference team, the Amelia, Mac, and Chris, any comments? This is for Chris's first facilitation, so we're pretty excited about that too.
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Just I know in my group, and I'm sure in the other groups too, I love people came from such different backgrounds. Like we had 2 students, I think that from Drexel University, learning about peace engineering, and that's how they heard about this, and so that was wonderful. And then people from different ages and different experiences and perspectives. So that was really valuable.
Excellent, thank you. Mac, Crystal, you don't have to say anything, but you have the floor if you want to.
I was just gonna say thank you all for being here. Thank you to my group. You know, we were actually going down a really great line of thought and engagement, and it was sad to see that we couldn't. So I hope it happens again. I'm sure we can work something out on the dialogue.
Oh, I think we probably could, yeah. And Chris, anything?
Just thank you to my group. It was great. I've been agonizing over this all day. I've been so nervous and shaky, and I just want to thank them because they were amazing and brought such great food for thought.
Okay,
Awesome.
well, yeah. So I'm just really happy that we had people who were passionate about this, and that Arthur and I could get together on the same, not stage, but at least virtual space, and that we've begun some conversations that are really important. And we will figure out ways between all of us together how we might continue that in different places and in different ways. So yeah, so thank you all for coming, and we will keep you updated with further events through the Carter School and ODIME and Dialogue and Difference. And again, if you think of something and would like to send me a note, P. Maulden, P-M-A-U-L-D-E-N, I can spell my name, at gmu.edu, which is good. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So just send me a note, and that would be great. And we can bring it into our discussions and plan around it. So thank you for your attendance and your interest and your insights. So please stay safe, and safe as we can. I mean, everything has to be multiply qualified, but try to bear up under the unbelievable burden of the time in which we live. So thank you.